Husband leaves wife on abandoned farm. Figure it out, we're not married anymore. With her face streaked with dirt and tears, Barbara Johnson watched the dust kicked up by her husband's blue pickup truck as it disappeared down the dirt. His last words still cut through her mind like knives. Figure it out, we're not married anymore. Richard, come back. She shouted, her voice breaking as she stumbled forward a few steps before tripping and falling to her knees on the dry earth. You can't leave me like this. But the truck was already too far away for him to hear her. Or maybe he just didn't want to. 23 years of marriage ended like this, abandoned on a forgotten farm in rural Tennessee, with no running water, no electricity, no money, just the clothes on her back and a small bag of personal belongings. The weight of the situation pressed down on her shoulders as she sat in the dirt hugging her knees. What was supposed to be a weekend trip to see the new property he bought as an investment had turned out to be a cruel trap. I'm just going to grab a few things from the market in town. I'll be right back, he had said 3 hours earlier, with a strange smile she hadn't understood at the time. Now, at 49 years old, Barbara was completely alone, with no one to help her in the middle of nowhere. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange that contrasted with the grey of the small, partially collapsed wooden house a few yards away. Was that where she'd spend the night? How would she survive? The farm had clearly been abandoned for years. Tall weeds covered nearly everything except the packed, dry ground near the house. A broken, weathered fence marked the property line, which seemed to stretch for acres before meeting dense woods in the distance. Her legs trembling, Barbara stood and walked toward the house. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dusty, nearly empty interior. There was only an old wooden table, 2 chairs, a broken cabinet, and in one corner a thin, worn-out mattress on the floor. Holes in the roof let in beams of light, and she could only imagine what would happen when it rained. My God, what am I going to do now? She whispered to herself, panic rising. Barbara had left her phone charging in Richard's car, believing they'd return to Chicago the same day. Now she had no way to call for help, no way to reach her daughter Jennifer, who had lived in England for 5 years and barely spoke to her since marrying a British businessman. Night fell quickly, bringing near-total darkness and an eerie silence, broken only by the sounds of nature. With no electricity, Barbara used the flashlight on her small digital wristwatch to make do with the old mattress. Lying there in this strange, hostile place, she finally let the tears come in full force. How could Richard do this to her? After all these years together, after she had been a devoted wife, raised their daughter practically alone while he built the family's future with his business. How could he just abandon her in the middle of nowhere, with nothing, no explanation? Sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, it was filled with nightmares. Barbara woke with a start as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the holes in the roof. For a moment she thought it had all been a bad dream, but reality quickly set in again. In the daylight she could see the property more clearly. The house was in worse shape than she'd realized the night before. The roof needed urgent repairs. The walls had cracks and there were signs of termites in several wooden structures. Next to the main house stood a small shed used for storage, also in poor condition. Exploring the house again, Barbara found some old yellowed papers in a drawer of the broken cabinet. They were farm documents indicating that the property was named Hope Farm and belonged to the Smith family, the maiden name of Richard's mother. So this farm belongs to his family, she murmured to herself. That's why he brought me here. As she examined the documents more closely, she found something that made her heart race. A death certificate. It was for Eleanor Smith, Richard's grandmother, who had passed away over 10 years earlier. Alongside it was a will torn in half, stating that Hope Farm should go to the women of the family who showed love for the land. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Barbara set the papers aside and left the house. She needed to find water and food if she wanted to survive. Looking around, she spotted a small manual water pump beside the shed. After much effort, she managed to get a trickle of water, but it was muddy and didn't seem safe to drink. Following what appeared to be an old path, she discovered a small stream with reasonably clean water, about 200 yards from the house. At least she wouldn't die of thirst. As for food, she found some fruit trees, guava and mango, that, though poorly tended, still bore some fruit. As she returned to the house with a few picked guavas and mangoes, Barbara heard the sound of an engine approaching. Her heart raced. Was Richard coming back? Had he changed his mind? But it wasn't. Richard's blue pickup truck coming down the dirt road. It was an old red pickup, driven by a middle-aged man with a tan, rugged appearance. He stopped the vehicle a few yards from the house and got out, looking at Barbara curiously. "Are you related to Mr. Richard?" he asked, tipping his straw hat politely. "I was his wife," Barbara replied hesitantly, unsure whether to trust this stranger. The man looked confused. His wife? But Mr. Richard was a widower. The revelation hit Barbara like a bolt of lightning. Widower? Richard had always told her he was single when they met, that he'd never been married before. "Who are you?" she asked, feeling more lost by the minute. "Name's William. I'm the neighbor from the next property over," he said, pointing beyond. The broken fence. "I came because I saw movement yesterday and today. This farm's been abandoned for years, ever since Mrs. Eleanor passed. Mr. Richard shows up now and then, but he never stays long." "He left me here yesterday," Barbara said, her voice breaking. "Said we weren't married anymore and just drove. Off, I don't even know where I am." William took off his hat again, this time in a gesture that seemed like respect for her misfortune. "You're at Hope Farm in the town of Oakville, rural Tennessee. The nearest city is about 12 miles from here." 12 miles? Barbara felt despair rising. "How am I supposed to get there? I don't have a car, no money, nothing. Look, I don't know what happened between you and Mr. Richard, but I can't leave a woman alone in need," William said, sounding genuinely concerned. "I can take you to town right now if you want." Barbara hesitated. Should she trust this stranger? But what choice did she have? Stay there alone with no resources? "Before that," William continued, glancing at the house, "did Mr. Richard say when he's coming back? Because, with all due respect, he owes me some money. He also borrowed some tools and never returned them." "He's not coming back," replied Barbara, bitter. "He left me here and told me to fend for myself." William scratched his head, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Barbara Johnson." "Mrs. Johnson, if you'd like, I can take you into town. There's a police station there. You could seek help." Barbara considered the offer. A police station might help, but what would she say? My husband abandoned me. That wasn't a crime, and she had no way to prove anything. She had no documents, no access to the joint bank account she shared with Richard, nothing but the wedding ring on her finger and a few clothes in her bag. "I need to think," she finally said. "I don't know if I should go to town or stay here and wait. What if he comes back and I'm not here?" William nodded, understanding. "Look, I live just over that hill." He pointed to a gentle slope to the northeast. "If you need help, just come by. It's not too far. You can walk there. My wife Margaret will understand the situation, and if you change your mind about going to town, just let me know." "Thank you," Barbara murmured, grateful for the man's kindness, though still wary. After William left, Barbara went back inside the house and collapsed into the old chair. A widower? Richard had been married before? Why had he never told her? What else was he hiding? With trembling hands, she sifted through the papers she'd found again. Besides the torn will, there were old receipts, utility bills from years ago, and a few letters. One caught her eye. It was addressed to Richard, from a bank dated 6 months earlier. As she read it, her blood ran cold. It was a notice of an approved loan for $250,000 in the name of Barbara Johnson Smith. But she had never applied for such a loan. Reading further, she discovered the loan used as collateral a property, their apartment in Chicago, which was in her name because Richard had insisted years ago, citing tax reasons for his business. I can't believe he did this," she whispered, feeling betrayed in a way she'd never imagined possible. Digging through more papers, she found similar notices, all for loans taken out in her name, without her knowledge. In total, they amounted to nearly $800,000. Night had fallen again by the time Barbara fully grasped the extent of Richard's betrayal. He hadn't just abandoned her in the middle of nowhere. He'd stolen her identity, taken out massive debts in her name, and likely planned to disappear with the money, leaving her to face the consequences. Lying on the old mattress, Barbara cried until she had no tears left. By the time sleep finally came, she had made a decision. She wouldn't be a victim. She wouldn't let Richard destroy her life. Somehow she'd find a way to survive and fight back against this injustice. The next morning she woke to birdsong. Her body ached from the uncomfortable mattress, but she felt strangely stronger. Anger had replaced her initial despair, giving her purpose. After eating some fruit she'd gathered the day before, Barbara decided to explore the property further. Maybe there was something useful that could help her survive while she planned her next move. Behind the house she discovered what had once been a garden. Though overgrown and neglected, she could still make out some beds. To her surprise, she spotted a few plants still thriving despite the lack of care: wild basil, rosemary, and even volunteer tomatoes that had spread on their own. Her maternal grandmother had been knowledgeable about medicinal plants, and as a child Barbara spent summers in the small rural town in Chicago where her grandmother lived, learning to identify useful herbs. That knowledge, dormant after decades of city life, now returned as an unexpected gift. "This is horsetail," she murmured, recognizing a plant with thin, jointed stems, "and that over there looks like St. John's wort." Excited by her discovery, Barbara spent the rest of the morning clearing a small area of the old garden, pulling weeds with her bare hands. She didn't have the right tools, but that didn't stop her. Her nails were caked with dirt, her hands blistered and soon bleeding, but she kept going. Near noon she heard the sound of an engine again. This time it was a motorcycle approaching. The rider, a young man around 20 years old, stopped near the house and got off carrying a small basket. "Mrs. Johnson?" he called. Barbara approached cautiously. "Yes, that's me." "My name is Jason. I'm William's son," the young man introduced himself. "My dad told me about you, and my mum sent this." He held out the basket, which contained homemade bread, some eggs, a piece of cheese, and a bottle of water. "Mom said you might need food and invited you to have lunch with us today if you'd like." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Barbara's eyes. After a whole day of eating only fruit, the thought of a decent meal was more than welcome. "Please thank your mother for me. Tell her I accept the invitation. I can take you on the back of my bike," Jason offered. Barbara hesitated for a moment, still wary, but decided to accept. What did she have to lose? She grabbed her small bag with the few belongings she had, locked the door, though she wasn't sure why, since there was nothing of value inside, and followed Jason. William's property was about 2 kilometers away. It wasn't a large farm, but it was well kept. A simple but comfortable house, a small pen with a few cows, and a thriving garden that made Barbara sigh with envy. Margaret, William's wife, was a sturdy woman with an easy smile who welcomed Barbara with open arms. "Come in, dear. William told me what happened. What a heartless man your husband is, leaving his wife alone in the middle of nowhere." Lunch was simple but delicious. Rice, beans, pot roast with cassava, and a fresh garden salad. As they ate, Barbara shared more about her situation. Her 23-year marriage, her daughter living in England, and how Richard had deceived her, bringing her to that abandoned farm under the pretense of a day trip. "And now I've found out he took out several loans in my name without me knowing," she finished, her voice trembling with anger and frustration. William and Margaret exchanged worried glances. "That's a crime, Mrs. Johnson," William said seriously. "You need to report him." "With what proof?" Barbara countered. "The documents I found might not be enough, and even if they are, how do I go after him? I have no money, nowhere to go." "You can stay with us for a few days," Margaret offered quickly. "No, I can't accept. You've already done so much for me," Barbara refused, though the offer was tempting. "Then how about this?" William suggested. "Tomorrow I'll take you into town. There's an attorney there who works for free for those who can't pay. Maybe she can help. And in the meantime," Margaret added, "you can stay at the farm. We'll bring you some things, a better mattress, some pots, food. Jason can stop by every day to see if you need anything." Barbara felt a lump in her throat. The kindness of these strangers was overwhelming. Why are you helping me so much? You don't even know me." Margaret smiled, holding Barbara's hand across the table. "Because it's the right thing to do, my dear. And because no one knows what tomorrow holds. Today it's us helping you. Tomorrow, who knows, it might be us needing help." After lunch, William took his pickup truck and, along with Jason, drove to Hope Farm with a newer mattress, some blankets, pots, plates, silverware, a kerosene lamp, matches and a box of basic groceries: rice, beans, oil, salt, coffee and sugar. "This should help you get by for a week or two," William said. "Tomorrow morning I'll come pick you up to go into town." That night Barbara slept better. The new mattress was infinitely more comfortable, and the certainty that she wasn't completely alone in the world eased her heart. She still felt anger toward Richard, still betrayed and abandoned, but now there was also a small flame of hope. The next morning, as promised, William arrived early to take her to town. And the trip took nearly an hour down the bumpy dirt road. Oakville was a small town with about 10,000 residents, a central square with the main church, a few commercial streets, and simple residential neighborhoods spreading out around it. The lawyer who provided free services, Attorney Sarah, had her office in a small room attached to the town hall. She was a young woman, freshly graduated, but she showed great interest in Barbara's case. "What your husband did constitutes several crimes, Mrs. Johnson," she explained after hearing the whole story. "Fraud, falsification of documents, use of forged papers. We need to file a police report immediately and take legal action to cancel those loans." "But how will I prove it wasn't me who requested those loans?" Barbara asked anxiously. "Handwriting analysis for starters, and we can request the bank's surveillance recordings if he went in person. Besides, we'll investigate where the money went. If it ended up in his accounts, the scheme becomes even clearer." While Attorney Sarah prepared the necessary documents, Barbara took the opportunity to ask about Hope Farm. "Do you know who legally owns that property?" The lawyer furrowed her brow, thoughtful. "I can look it up at the property registry. Do you have the exact address?" Barbara showed the documents she had brought with her. Attorney Sarah examined them carefully. "Interesting. According to this, Hope Farm belonged to Eleanor Smith, and this torn will... It's very strange. I'll look into this too. It might be an important clue." After filing the police report at the small local station and signing power of attorney forms with the lawyer, Barbara and William returned to the farm. On the way, he told her more about the area and Hope Farm. "That land used to be very productive. You know, in Mrs. Eleanor's time it grew everything: coffee, corn, beans. There was even a small cheese production that was famous around here. After she died, no one took proper care of it. Your Richard showed up now and then, but he never did anything for the property." "Did you know this, Mrs. Eleanor?" Barbara asked, curiously. "Of course I did. She was quite a woman, fiery as pepper, but fair and hard-working. She was always arguing with her grandson, saying he didn't appreciate things. Seems she was right." When they got back to the farm, Barbara was surprised. Margaret and 2 other women from the neighborhood were there, cleaning the house. "We couldn't let you stay in all this mess," Margaret explained as she swept the dirt floor. "Look what we found in the shed. Old tools, but still good. There's a hoe, shovel, rake. Everything you'll need if you want to bring that garden back to life." Barbara felt overwhelmed once again by the kindness of these people. Even amidst so much suffering and uncertainty, there was kindness in the world. "I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank us," replied one of the women, who introduced herself as Dorothy. "Out here in the countryside, we help each other, and besides, we're happy someone will finally take care of Hope Farm. It was sad to see such a beautiful place abandoned." That night, alone again, but with the house clean and tidy, Barbara sat at the kitchen table with an old notebook she'd found among the belongings left in the house. By the light of the oil lamp, she began writing a plan. If she had to stay there for a while, she needed to find a way to survive. She couldn't depend on her neighbor's charity forever. The medicinal plants she'd identified could be a start. With the knowledge she'd inherited from her grandmother, maybe she could prepare teas and ointments to sell at the town market. She might even revive the vegetable garden, growing greens and vegetables, not just for herself, but also to sell. As she planned, an idea began forming in her mind. What if this terrible situation, this cruel abandonment, was actually a hidden opportunity? What if, for the first time in a long while, she could take control of her own life without depending on Richard? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. In the weeks that followed, Barbara began putting her plan into action. With the tools she found in the shed, she dedicated herself to cleaning and preparing the old garden. The work was hard for someone who'd always lived in the city, but there was something strangely therapeutic about digging the earth, pulling weeds, and preparing the beds. Jason, William's son, showed up almost every day, sometimes bringing seeds his mother sent, other times helping with the heavier tasks. The young man, initially shy, gradually opened up, sharing his dream of studying agronomy, but lacking the financial means. "I'm saving up," he explained, while helping Barbara build a fence to protect the garden from wild animals. "I work at the town's agricultural co-op on weekends and do odd jobs during the week, but I still have a long way to go." Barbara was feeling more at ease on the farm. The house, though simple, was now clean and somewhat organized. With Margaret's and other neighbors' help, she'd improvised curtains from donated fabric, fixed a shelf to store her few belongings, and even created a small sitting area with logs as benches around a fire pit for colder nights. Attorney Sarah stayed in frequent contact, providing updates on the investigation. The news wasn't encouraging. Richard seemed to have vanished completely. His apartment in Chicago was empty. The company he claimed to own no longer existed, and his bank accounts had been drained. "It's like he planned this for a long time," the attorney remarked during one of her visits to the farm. "But we've made an important breakthrough. I found Eleanor Smith's original will at the courthouse, and it's not torn like the one you found." Attorney Sarah showed Barbara a certified copy of the document. In it, Eleanor Smith made it clear that Hope Farm was to go to the women of the family who showed love for the land. Specifically, it stated that her grandson, Richard, could only claim the property if he was married, and his wife agreed to live and work on the farm. "I think I understand his plan now," Barbara said, feeling a mix of anger and surprise. "He brought me here, abandoned me on purpose, and then could claim he met the condition. His wife is living on the farm. Meanwhile, he ran off with all the money from the loans he took out in my name." "Exactly. But there's one thing he didn't count on. According to this will, the property isn't his to use as he pleases. It belongs to the woman in the family who shows love for the land. And from what I can see," the attorney pointed to the revitalized garden and the improvements to the house, "you're demonstrating that love far more than he ever did." That revelation gave Barbara a new purpose. If the farm could legally be hers by fulfilling the conditions of the will, then she would do everything to turn that abandoned place into something productive and beautiful again. Over the months, Hope Farm began to flourish under Barbara's care. The garden now produced an impressive variety of greens, vegetables, and herbs. Following Jason's advice, she had also planted cassava, sweet potatoes, and corn in a larger area, taking advantage of the rainy season. Medicinal plants became her specialty. Using knowledge passed down from her grandmother and researching in an old herbal book Dorothy had lent her, Barbara began making teas, ointments, and tinctures that quickly gained a reputation in the area for their effectiveness. Every Saturday, William would take her to the town market, where she set up a small stall to sell her products. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to buy basic supplies she couldn't produce on the farm and, little by little, invest in improvements for the property. 6 months after being abandoned by Richard, Barbara was nothing like the desperate, vulnerable woman from that first day. Her face, once marked only by tears, now had the healthy tan of someone who worked outdoors. Her arms, once frail, had grown strong from daily labor. And her eyes, once constantly brimming with tears, now shone with determination and even a certain peace. It was then that the inevitable happened. Richard reappeared. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Barbara had just returned from the market, where she had sold nearly all her products. She was in the makeshift kitchen, preparing a simple dinner when she heard the sound of a car approaching. Her heart raced as she recognized the blue pickup truck. For a moment, she felt fear. Then, anger, and finally a strange calm. She stepped out into the yard and waited for him to get out of the vehicle. Richard looked surprised to see the transformation, not just of the farm, but of Barbara herself. He had expected to find both, the property and the woman, in a state of neglect and despair. "What have you done to this place?" and were his first words as he looked around, taking in the thriving garden, the house with its repaired roof, the clean and well-kept yard. "I did what your grandmother's will required," Barbara replied coolly. "I showed love for the land." Richard frowned, confused. "What will? What are you talking about?" "Your grandmother Eleanor's will, the one you tore up and hid, but copies of which exist at the courthouse." From the shock on Richard's face, Barbara realized he hadn't expected this. He thought he had destroyed all evidence, that no one but him knew the contents of the will. "You can't keep this farm," he said, recovering from his initial shock. "It's rightfully mine. My grandmother died years ago, and I'm the only heir." "Not according to her will," Barbara countered, "and I've already filed a petition in court to enforce Eleanor's wishes." "You can't do that," Richard exclaimed, stepping threateningly toward Barbara. But before he could get any closer, another pickup truck pulled into the property, parking quickly. It was William, accompanied by attorney Sarah and a court officer. "You must be Richard Smith," the officer said, stepping forward. "I have a summons for you. There's an ongoing investigation into fraudulent loans in Barbara Johnson's name. You need to come to the police station to give a statement." Richard paled. He hadn't expected this. He'd calculated that Barbara would be so isolated and desperate that she wouldn't be able to take any legal action against him. "It's all lies," he tried to defend himself. "She's making this up to take my farm." "The investigation will reveal the truth, Mr. Smith," the officer replied calmly. "For now, I suggest you cooperate, and I must inform you that the judge has issued a restraining order preventing you from selling or transferring any assets until this matter is resolved." Defeated, Richard returned to his pickup truck. Before leaving, he shot one last furious glance at Barbara. "This isn't over. I'll prove this farm is mine, and I'll reclaim what belongs to me." After he left, Barbara sat on one of the makeshift benches in the yard, feeling her legs tremble. Despite the strong front she'd put up, the encounter had shaken her deeply. "You were very brave," said attorney Sarah, sitting beside her. "And we did the right thing by coming. I had a feeling when I heard he'd been seen in town today." "What happens now?" asked Barbara, still shaking. "Now he'll have to answer for his crimes. As for the farm, I'm confident the judge will respect Mrs. Eleanor Smith's will. You've shown far more love for this land in 6 months than he has in all the years since your grandmother passed." That night, Barbara struggled to sleep. Richard's return had brought up feelings she thought she'd moved past. The pain of betrayal, the anger over abandonment, the fear of what he might still do. But there was also a new sensation, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Pride in herself, in her strength, in her ability to rebuild her life from scratch. In the weeks that followed, as the legal proceedings against Richard moved slowly forward, Barbara continued working the farm. Now, with more consistent help from Jason, who had become a kind of informal partner, she was expanding production. An important discovery came when, following an old map found among the house's documents, they located a natural spring that had been buried years before. With hard work and help from some neighbors, they managed to unearth it and restore the flow of crystal-clear water. "This water is special," William remarked after tasting it. "Rich in minerals. Back in Mrs. Eleanor's day, they said it had healing properties." The spring water became an additional attraction. Barbara began bottling it in small jars and selling it alongside her natural products at the market. Demand grew quickly, and soon she couldn't keep up alone. "Mrs. Johnson, I had an idea," Jason said one day while helping bottle the water. "You could hire someone else to help out. Lots of folks around here need work, and production's only increasing." Barbara considered the suggestion. It was true. She could hardly manage everything alone anymore, even with occasional help from Jason and other neighbors, but she feared overextending herself financially. "I don't know if I have the money to pay an employee, Jason." "Could start with a percentage of production," he suggested. "I know some folks who'd agree, and the farm has potential for so much more." So Barbara hired her first employee, Mrs. Edith, a 60-year-old woman with extensive knowledge of medicinal plants who'd lost her job in town. Edith brought not just her labor, but valuable herbal expertise Barbara hadn't yet mastered. The partnership worked so well that soon other locals began approaching Barbara offering their services. Within less than a year of being abandoned, she was already coordinating a small team of 5 people, all working on a partnership basis. They received a percentage of the profits from the sale of the products. Hope Farm was gradually becoming a small natural production center known throughout the region. People from nearby towns began showing up to buy products directly from the farm, especially the natural mineral water, which had gained fame for its health benefits. It was during this period of growing prosperity that Barbara received unexpected news. Her daughter Jennifer was coming from England to visit her. The news brought a whirlwind of emotions. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd seen her daughter, and in recent months communication between them had been minimal. Jennifer only knew her parents had separated, but wasn't aware of the details of the abandonment or the new life Barbara had built on the farm. When the day of their reunion finally arrived, Barbara was nervous. How would Jennifer react to seeing her mother living on a simple farm in the countryside, so different from the comfortable apartment in Chicago where she'd grown up? Would she accept the choices Barbara had made? William offered to pick Jennifer up from the bus station in town. As the car approached the farm, Barbara waited anxiously in the yard, her heart racing. Jennifer stepped out of the vehicle, looking around curiously. She was thinner than Barbara remembered, and there was a weariness in her eyes that didn't match her 28 years. When she saw her mother, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she murmured, running to embrace her. The hug was long and tight, filled with unspoken emotions. When they finally pulled apart, Jennifer looked at her mother with admiration. "You look different, stronger." "Life here changed me," Barbara replied, smiling through tears. "Come, I'll show you everything." As they walked around the property, Barbara told her daughter the whole story. The abandonment, the discovery of the fraudulent loans, her great-grandmother's will, and how she'd turned an abandoned farm into a thriving business. Jennifer listened in silence, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief or wiping away a tear. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Mom? I would have come, I would have helped. You had your own life, your own struggles. And, to be honest, at first I was ashamed of being deceived, of not realizing what Richard was doing." At the mention of her father's name, Jennifer tensed. "He came to see me 2 months ago, you know? Showed up in Lisbon saying he was traveling for business and wanted to see me. He asked to borrow money, said he'd been through financial trouble because of you, that you'd taken everything in the separation." Barbara felt a tightness in her chest. So Richard had tried to deceive even his own daughter. "And you? Did you lend it to him?" Jennifer gave a sad smile. "I almost fell for it, but Anthony, my husband, was suspicious. He never liked Dad, thought he was too slippery. So we made up an excuse not to lend the money. After that, Dad disappeared again. Doesn't answer messages, doesn't pick up calls." The two fell silent for a moment, contemplating just how far Richard would go to manipulate and deceive the people he supposedly loved. "He's being sued," Barbara said, "for fraud, misrepresentation, and other crimes. He could end up in prison." Jennifer nodded, her expression serious. "Maybe that's for the best. Maybe he needs to learn a lesson." That evening, as they ate dinner by lamplight, the farm still didn't have electricity, though Barbara had already been saving up for it, Jennifer revealed another reason for her visit. "My marriage is over, Mom. Anthony cheated on me with his business partner, and now I'm jobless with no home of my own. I came back to the US to start over." Barbara reached across the table and held her daughter's hand. "This farm is our home now, Jennifer. If you'd like to stay, there's room for you here, and work too if you're interested." The surprise on Jennifer's face was replaced by an emotional smile. "Really? You'd accept me here? I don't know anything about plants or farm work." "I didn't either when I first arrived," Barbara Johnson replied. "I learned by doing, making mistakes, trying again. And you have other skills. You have a degree in business administration, speak fluent English. That could be very useful, if we want to expand the business." The prospect of having her daughter nearby after so many years apart filled Barbara with a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. And for Jennifer, the idea of starting over beside her mother in a place so different from everything she knew brought both fear and hope. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just getting started. Now, continuing. The next morning, Barbara woke to the sound of voices in the yard. When she went out to check, she found Jennifer chatting excitedly with Jason, who had brought new seeds to plant. "Mom, Jason was telling me about his plans to expand the medicinal garden," Jennifer exclaimed, "and about his dream of starting a native plant nursery here at the farm." Barbara smiled, seeing the spark in her daughter's eyes. Maybe Jennifer would adapt to country life better than she expected. In the weeks that followed, mother and daughter worked together to improve Hope Farm. Jennifer, with her business knowledge, organized the accounting, set up a system to track inventory and production, and even developed a small marketing strategy, including more professional labels for their products and business cards. Jennifer's presence brought a new energy to Hope Farm. Her youthful enthusiasm, combined with her administrative skills, perfectly complemented Barbara's wisdom and experience. 3 months after Jennifer's arrival, an unexpected visitor appeared at the farm, Dr. Michael Thompson, a university ethnobotany professor who had heard about Hope Farm's natural products and wanted to see them for himself. Dr. Thompson was impressed by the variety of medicinal plants Barbara cultivated and her knowledge of their properties. He proposed a partnership. The university would fund research on the region's plants, using the farm as a study site, and in return provide technical guidance to improve production. "This place is a treasure, Mrs. Johnson," he remarked as they walked through the medicinal garden. "You're preserving traditional knowledge that's being lost in modern society. That's priceless." The university partnership opened new doors. Biology, agronomy, and pharmacy students began visiting the farm regularly for studies and internships. Some were so taken with the work that they offered to volunteer in exchange for learning. One of these students, Tyler, a 22-year-old environmental engineering major, brought a transformative idea. "Mrs. Johnson, this spring could be put to better use. The water is exceptionally pure and mineral-rich. With the right filtration and bottling system, you could market it on a larger scale." The idea was bold and would require investment, but Jennifer saw the potential immediately. Together with Jason, who was increasingly taking on the role of farm production manager, she began drafting a business plan to present to local small investors. Meanwhile, the case against Richard continued. Attorney Sarah provided regular updates. "He's trying to sell properties under his name in other towns to raise money for his defense," she shared during a visit. "But with the restraining order in place, the sales are being blocked. He seems desperate." The news brought conflicting feelings to Barbara. On one hand, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that Richard was facing consequences for his actions. On the other, she felt a pang of sadness thinking about how the man she once loved had turned into someone so hollow and dishonest. A year and a half after the abandonment, Hope Farm was practically unrecognizable. The main house had been renovated and expanded, with electricity and running water installed. A small processing plant for medicinal herbs now operated in the old shed, which had been completely rebuilt. The garden had expanded to cover nearly 2 hectares, with different sections for medicinal plants, organic vegetables, and edible flowers. The spring water, now properly tested and certified by the appropriate authorities, was bottled under the label Living Water of Hope and sold well in natural markets across the region. A small team of 10 permanent employees worked on the farm, along with temporary workers during peak production seasons. Jennifer and Jason had grown closer, working side by side in the daily operations of the farm. What had started as a professional partnership had evolved into a close friendship and, eventually, something more. Seeing them together, enthusiastically planning the farm's future, gave Barbara a sense that, despite everything, things had turned out the way they were meant to. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon that everything changed again. Barbara, Jennifer, and Jason were sitting on the porch, discussing plans for building a small visitor center, when they spotted 3 cars approaching down the dirt road. "Who could that be?" Barbara asked, standing up to get a better look. The first car was William's pickup truck, but the other two were unfamiliar. When they parked in the yard, William quickly stepped out, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Johnson, they're from the bank," he said, pointing to the occupants of the other vehicles. Men in suits who looked out of place in the rural setting. "They've come with a court order to seize the farm because of Mr. Richard's debts." The world seemed to collapse around Barbara. After everything she had built, after all the hard work and dedication, could she really lose it all because of debts Richard had incurred? One of the men, who introduced himself as Mr. Robert, the bank's legal representative, stepped forward with an envelope in hand. "Mrs. Barbara Johnson, I have here a repossession order. This property was used as collateral for loans that were not repaid by Mr. Richard Smith. The bank has the legal right to take possession." "But that's not possible," Jennifer protested, stepping beside her mother. "This farm never legally belonged to my father. There's a will." "The bank has no record of any will," Mr. Robert interrupted. "According to our records, the property was under Richard Smith's name when it was offered as collateral." Jason, who had quickly gone inside, returned with a folder of documents. "Here's the certified copy of Eleanor Smith's will," he said, handing the papers to the bank representative. "Fine, sir. And here's the initial petition for the legal case, where Mrs. Johnson is claiming ownership based on this will. The case is still pending, which means there's an ongoing legal dispute over the property. The bank can't take possession until this is resolved." Mr. Robert examined the documents carefully, his brow furrowed. "This complicates things," he admitted after a few moments. "I'll have to consult the bank's legal department, but know this, we won't easily give up our rights. The loans are real, and the money was issued in good faith." After the bank representatives left, promising to return with a final decision, Barbara sat heavily on the porch chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. "What will we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We'll fight, Mom," Jennifer replied with determination. "We didn't come this far to give up at the first threat." William, who had remained silent while observing the scene, stepped closer. "Mrs. Johnson, you have more allies than you realize. Everyone in the area knows what you've done for this farm, how you turned an abandoned place into something productive that creates jobs and income for the community. No one will want to see that destroyed because of debts from someone who never cared about this place." The friend's words brought some comfort, but Barbara knew the battle would be tough. Banks rarely let go of collateral, especially when significant amounts were involved. That same night, Attorney Sarah arrived at the farm, alerted by Jason about what had happened. "This was already in my calculations," she said after hearing the detailed account. "Richard is running out of options, so he probably warned the bank about the farm, hoping they'd seize it before the will's legal process concluded." "And what can we do?" Barbara asked anxiously. "We'll file an injunction to prevent any eviction until the main case is settled, and we'll request an expedited hearing, arguing there are imminent risks to the property." As they waited for legal developments, news of the threat to Hope Farm spread quickly through the community. To Barbara's surprise, residents from all over the region began showing up to offer support. Some brought food, others volunteered free labor to speed up ongoing projects, as if wanting to prove how much the farm had become important to everyone. Dr. Michael Thompson from the university mobilized colleagues from different departments to document the farm's significance as a center for preserving traditional knowledge and biodiversity. A group of students started a petition that quickly gathered thousands of signatures, urging the court to recognize Hope Farm's social and environmental value. 2 weeks after the bank representative's visit, a hearing was scheduled to decide on the injunction requested by Attorney Sarah. Barbara, Jennifer, and Jason attended, accompanied by William, Dr. Thompson, and several other supporters who insisted on being present. To everyone's surprise, Richard also showed up, accompanied by a high-priced lawyer. He was thinner and more worn down than Barbara remembered, and he avoided looking directly at her or Jennifer. The hearing was tense. The bank's lawyer argued that the institution had acted in good faith by accepting the farm as collateral, unaware of any ownership dispute. Richard's lawyer claimed his client was the rightful owner as the only direct descendant of Eleanor Smith, and that the will presented by Barbara was fraudulent. Attorney Sarah, in turn, not only presented the original will authenticated by the notary, but also testimonies from longtime neighbors confirming Eleanor's wish for the farm to go to women who loved the land. She also showed before and after photos of the property, highlighting the restoration work done by Barbara. The defendant not only fulfilled the conditions stipulated in the will by demonstrating love for the land, but also transformed an abandoned property into a productive center benefiting the entire community, the attorney argued. Meanwhile, the plaintiff, Mr. Richard Smith, has never shown any interest in the farm, except to use it as collateral for fraudulent loans. The judge, an older man with a serious demeanor, listened carefully to all the arguments. In the end, he announced that he would need more time to review the submitted documentation, but granted the requested injunction. Until a final decision is made regarding the ownership of Hope Farm, any eviction actions are prohibited. The farm will remain under the care of Mrs. Barbara Johnson, who shall continue her activities as usual, submitting monthly reports to this court. The decision was met with relief by Barbara and her supporters. It wasn't a definitive victory, but it bought them time to strengthen their case and continue their work on the farm. As she left the courtroom, Barbara came face to face with Richard in the hallway. For a moment, they stood in silence, studying each other. "Why are you doing this, Richard?" she finally asked. "Why can't you just let me keep the farm? You never cared about this place." Richard gave a bitter smile. "Because it's rightfully mine. My grandmother always said the farm would go to me, but on the condition that you took care of it, that you showed love for the land. You never did. And you think you can just show up out of nowhere and take what's mine?" His voice was thick with resentment. "You're not part of the Smith family. You have no right to anything." "She was your wife for over 20 years, Jennifer interjected, stepping closer. "And you left her on that farm with nothing, hoping she'd give up and leave, but she stayed. She turned an abandoned place into something beautiful and productive. What have you ever done for Hope Farm, besides using it as collateral for loans? You never intended to pay back." Richard didn't answer. He shot them one last furious look before walking away, following his impatiently waiting lawyer. Back at the farm, Barbara was greeted with a small celebration organized by the workers and neighbors. News of the judge's favorable decision had spread quickly. "This is just the beginning, Mom," Jennifer said, hugging her. "We still have a lot of work ahead." Barbara nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. The journey so far hadn't been easy, and what lay ahead would likely be even more challenging. But for the first time in a long while, she felt truly strong, capable of facing any obstacle. In the months that followed, as the main legal proceedings continued, Hope Farm kept thriving. With the temporary security provided by the injunction, Barbara, Jennifer, and Jason were able to move forward with their expansion plans. The small visitor center was built and quickly became a popular attraction for tourists interested in ecotourism and natural products. A shop was added to the center, selling not only the farm's goods but also handmade crafts from local residents. The mineral water project progressed, with the installation of proper filtration and bottling equipment. Living Water of Hope began distribution in larger regional markets, significantly boosting the farm's income. Jennifer and Jason, whose relationship had blossomed into an open romance, worked tirelessly to improve administration and production. Together, they had ambitious plans, including building a laboratory for medicinal plant studies in partnership with the university. The news that Jason had been accepted into the State University's agronomy program with a partial scholarship was met with joy by everyone. He would continue living on the farm and helping with management, traveling to classes 3 times a week. "It's a dream coming true," he confessed to Barbara, emotional. "And it's only possible because of you. If you hadn't given me the chance to work here, to learn hands-on, I never would have made it." "You deserve it, Jason," Barbara replied with maternal warmth. "I always believed in your potential." Life finally seemed to be falling into place, despite the constant shadow of the legal battle. Then, one October morning, 2 years after being abandoned at the farm, Barbara received a call from attorney Sarah. "Mrs. Johnson, the judge has scheduled the final hearing for 2 weeks from now. He said he already has enough evidence to make a decision." Barbara's heart raced. This was it. After 2 years of fighting, she would finally know whether she could keep the farm she had transformed with so much love and dedication, or if she would lose everything. The news spread quickly through the community. In the days leading up to the hearing, Barbara received countless visits of support. Neighbors brought homemade treats, and even the town mayor came in person to assure her he would do everything in his power to help, regardless of the court's decision. "Hope Farm has become a symbol for our region, Mrs. Johnson," the mayor explained, "an example of how adversity can be turned into opportunity. We don't want to lose that." On the eve of the hearing, as dusk settled, Barbara had an unexpected visitor, an elderly woman around 80 years old, who introduced herself as Gladys, cousin of Eleanor Smith. "I heard the story from Dorothy," the woman explained, accepting the coffee Barbara offered. "She told me how you transformed Eleanor's farm, and I had to see it with my own eyes." Gladys shared that she had grown up with Eleanor but lost touch. After they married and moved to different towns, years later, when they finally reunited, Eleanor was already ill. "That's when she made the will," Gladys revealed. "She always suspected her grandson didn't love the land. Said he only showed up when he needed money, asking her to sell off pieces here and there. It broke her heart to see the farm being sold off bit by bit." Barbara listened intently, each word helping piece together the puzzle of Hope Farm's history. "That's why she put that condition in the will," Gladys continued. "She believed only a woman who truly loved the land could stop the farm from being completely divided and sold. Eleanor was ahead of her time, you know. She believed in women's strength when it wasn't common." Gladys's visit, with her stories about Eleanor, strengthened Barbara's conviction that she was on the right path, honoring the legacy of the farm's former owner. On the morning of the decisive hearing, the courthouse was packed. It seemed every resident in the area had come to witness the conclusion of Hope Farm's story. Richard arrived with his lawyer, looking confident. He greeted a few acquaintances, but completely ignored Barbara, Jennifer, and Jason. The bank representatives were also present, still eager to recover the loan amounts given to Richard. When the judge entered the room, silence fell. After the preliminary procedures, he asked both sides to present their final arguments. Richard's lawyer went first, insisting his client was the rightful heir of Eleanor Smith, and that the will's condition about women who love the land was a misinterpretation of the deceased's true wishes. He also argued that Barbara had illegally taken possession of the property after being left there temporarily by Richard. The bank representatives emphasized that the institution had acted in good faith by accepting the farm as collateral, unaware of any dispute over the property. They requested that, regardless of who was declared the owner, the bank's rights as a creditor be preserved. Finally, Attorney Sarah presented Barbara's defense. She reaffirmed the authenticity of the will and how her client had fully met the conditions stipulated by Eleanor, transforming an abandoned property into a productive center that benefited the entire community. She also questioned the legitimacy of the loans taken out by Richard, noting that he faced charges for fraud and misrepresentation. After the presentations, the judge thanked everyone and announced he would withdraw to deliberate, returning in an hour with his decision. It was the longest hour of Barbara's life. Sitting on a bench in the courthouse hallway, with Jennifer holding her hand on one side and Jason on the other, she tried to prepare herself for any outcome. She had worked hard, had transformed the farm with love and dedication. But she knew justice didn't always prevail. When they were finally called back into the room, Barbara's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might leap out of her mouth. The judge entered with a solemn expression, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. After careful review of all the evidence presented, this court has reached the following conclusions. 1. Eleanor Smith's will is valid, and her wish that Hope Farm go to women of the family who demonstrate love for the land must be honored. 2. Barbara Johnson Smith, though not a blood relative of the Smith family, became part of the family through marriage, thus fulfilling the first requirement. 3. There is ample evidence that Barbara demonstrated love for the land, transforming an abandoned property into a productive venture that benefits the entire community, thereby fulfilling the second requirement. The judge paused, peering over his glasses at those present before continuing. As for the loans taken out by Richard Smith using the farm as collateral, this court finds they were made in bad faith, as he was not the rightful owner of the farm when he offered it as security. Therefore, I declare Barbara Johnson Smith the rightful owner of Hope Farm, free of any obligations related to loans taken out by Richard Smith. The room erupted in applause and joyful exclamations. Barbara, in shock, couldn't hold back her tears. Jennifer hugged her tightly, also crying. "We did it, Mum. The farm is yours." Richard stood abruptly, his face red with anger. His lawyer tried to calm him, mentioning possible appeals, but he shook off the restraining hand and stormed out of the room. The bank representatives looked disappointed, but not surprised. They had likely anticipated this outcome and would now focus on recovering the loan amount directly from Richard, targeting any other assets he might have. As Barbara left the courthouse, she was greeted with more applause and hugs from the residents, who had eagerly awaited the decision. There was even a small impromptu band playing folk songs in celebration. "Mrs. Barbara," William called, approaching with a broad smile. "The community has organized a party for you at the farm. Everyone wants to celebrate this victory." The party at Hope Farm lasted late into the night. Under the stars, around a large bonfire, people of all ages celebrated as if the victory belonged to each of them. In a way, it did. The farm had become an important part of the community's life, creating jobs, preserving traditional knowledge, and promoting respect for nature. As she watched the celebration from afar, sitting on the porch of the house, Barbara reflected on the incredible journey she had traveled. From the despair of that first day, abandoned with nothing but the clothes on her back, to this moment of triumph, the distance seemed almost impossible to bridge. And yet, she had done it. Jennifer approached, sitting beside her mother and resting her head on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how life takes its turns," Barbara replied, wrapping her arm around her daughter. "When your father left me here, I thought it was the end. That there was no way to survive, to start over. And now look, I have a farm, a thriving business, you by my side. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm truly in control, making my own decisions, building my own path." "You're amazing, Mum," Jennifer said with admiration. "Most people would have given up on the first day, would have left this place, but you stayed. You turned abandonment into opportunity." From a distance, they saw Jason approaching, a smile on his face and 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "I thought you might want some coffee," he said, handing them the cups. "The party's lively, but I noticed you two preferred to stay here, quieter." "We were just reflecting," Barbara explained, "on everything that's happened, everything still to come." Jason nodded understandingly. Then, looking at Jennifer, with a special spark in his eyes, he said, "I was talking to Dr. Michael about the plant lab project. He thinks the university could secure full funding if we present a well-structured plan." "We can start working on that tomorrow," Jennifer replied excitedly. "I already have some ideas for organizing the project." Barbara watched their interaction with a smile. The mutual affection and admiration were evident, filling her with hope for the future. Later, when the party had ended and everyone had left, Barbara walked alone through the property under the moonlight. She passed the medicinal garden, the newly planted orchard, the pure spring water that had been restored. In every corner of the farm, there was a piece of her sweat, her effort, her determination. She stopped in front of an old tree, a yellow oak that, according to William, had been planted by Eleanor when she was young. The majestic tree, which bloomed every year with a burst of golden flowers, seemed to symbolize Hope Farm itself. Strong, resilient, capable of surviving storms and abandonment, only to bloom again. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor," Barbara whispered. Into the night, feeling an inexplicable connection to the woman she had never met, but whose legacy she now preserved. "I promise to take good care of your land." 3 years after being abandoned on the farm, Barbara was completely transformed. Not just physically, her body stronger, her skin sun-kissed, her hands calloused from working the land, but also inside. The insecure, dependent woman who had relied on her husband had given way to a confident entrepreneur, respected by the community and admired for her strength and determination. Hope Farm, in turn, had become a regional model for sustainable farming and preserving traditional knowledge. The medicinal plant lab, built in partnership with the university, attracted researchers from across the country. The mineral water from the spring was now bottled in a small certified facility and distributed to several towns in the state. Jennifer and Jason had made their relationship official with an engagement and planned a simple ceremony right there on the farm next summer. Together, they managed operations with competence and vision, always seeking innovations that respected nature and local tradition. On a quiet morning, while Barbara was in the medicinal garden picking herbs for a new line of teas they were developing, she saw an unfamiliar car approaching down the dirt road. For a moment her heart raced, thinking it might be Richard coming back to cause trouble. But she soon relaxed when she realized it was an official vehicle with a State Department logo. "Mrs. Barbara Johnson?" asked a middle-aged woman, stepping out of the car with a folder in hand. "I'm Lisa Miller from the State Department of Family Farming. I came to see your work here at Hope Farm firsthand. We've received many recommendations about the sustainable model you've implemented." Barbara guided the visitor around the property, explaining the projects, the challenges they'd overcome, and the partnerships they'd built. Lisa seemed impressed, taking notes and photographs. "What you've built here is extraordinary, Mrs. Johnson," she remarked at the end of the tour. "It's exactly the kind of initiative the state wants to support and replicate in other communities. We'd like to include Hope Farm in our technical visit program so family farmers from other regions can learn from your experience." The proposal was an honor and a recognition of everyone's hard work. Barbara happily accepted, glad to share the knowledge she'd gained with others who, like her once, might be struggling to survive in rural life. After the department representative left, promising to return soon with a team to formalize the partnership, Barbara sat in the shade of the yellow oak tree, her favorite spot for reflection. From there, she could see almost the entire farm, the lush fields, the well-kept buildings, the staff working in harmony. Who could have imagined on that terrible day when she was abandoned, that such abandonment would become the start of a new life, one far fuller and more authentic than what she'd had before? Who could have predicted that the desperate woman, sitting on the ground with tear-streaked cheeks, watching the blue pickup truck drive away, would find within herself a strength she never knew she had? Life had taught her a precious lesson. Sometimes what seems like the end is only the beginning, and sometimes abandonment can be the first step toward true freedom. End of story. Dear listener, you've just followed Barbara's incredible journey, from the pain of abandonment to the triumph of overcoming. What would you do in her place? Would you have the same courage to start over? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this one. Your company means the world to us.